Fantastic. So again, thank you so much for joining. I think that there are some people there on site and also some people virtual, right, Gary?
That is correct. Yes.
Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to do the presentation, but if you have questions, you can post them in the chat or you can keep them, and we will have some minutes for Q&A at the end, okay?
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Alba Rivas. I am a developer advocate at Salesforce. I've been working for Salesforce for 4 years, and I was a Salesforce developer before, and before that a Java developer. So I have a really technical background. And here you have all my social networks, my email, and so on, in case that you want to ask me questions later, or in case that you want to give me any feedback or share whatever you want to share with me. And as I work for Salesforce, I need to include this slide, which just means that Salesforce is a publicly traded company. We are on the stock exchange, and it means that you should make purchasing decisions based on the functionality that is GA. But we're going to talk about almost all the features that we're going to talk about are already GA, so we should be pretty safe here. So when I suggested this topic to Gary, I wasn't sure if you wanted to know only about DevOps Center or if you wanted to know about DevOps in general. And he told me, let's do like an intro to DevOps and then you go straight into DevOps Center, because sometimes like we are very familiar with the term DevOps. We listen to it a lot of times, right? But it can be a little bit abstract. And we know that certain things, certain tools, certain practices that are part of DevOps, but sometimes we don't completely understand the topic. So I think that this definition that I took like from is a mix from different places, from the definition I saw in different places, explains really well what DevOps is. And I like it because it says that it is a set of practices, tools, and also a cultural philosophy. And that's completely right? That helps you like automate and integrate all the work streams that the software development teams are doing and the IT teams are doing. They need to release an app, when they need to release software, and by implementing those practices, using those tools and following that philosophy, what we get to do is to improve and shorten the software development lifecycle, right? That's exactly the end purpose of adopting DevOps practices. So DevOps practices apply to all the different stages of the software development lifecycle. Normally, everything starts when you plan the features that you want to implement, right? Then you code those features, you build the code so that it can be deployed somewhere in Salesforce. That's really easy because it's just you deploy the code and it automatically builds. Then you test that code, that feature that you have built. There will be some automated tests sometimes. Sometimes you will do some manual tests, right? And there are like many different kind of tests that you can do to ensure that your software is following quality, best practices, and not breaking anything else within your org or within your app, if we talk in general terms. Then you release that feature or that version of your artifact or your app, and you deploy that release, right? It can be to an org, but if you are an ISV, it could be to a customer org. And there is a phase in which you operate and monitor everything that's deployed so that you can think about new features, detect bugs, and so that the software development lifecycle starts again, right? So DevOps is about the tools that you can use in all these different stages to automate processes and to improve the quality of the software, the practices that we follow by implementing those tools and by using those tools, and the cultural philosophy, which is around everything, right? And that we all should bear in mind if we want to really improve that software development lifecycle. Great. So if we take a look at the Salesforce ecosystem, there are several tools that have been developed by Salesforce to help us implement those DevOps practices and make them a reality, right? And we're going to talk about some of the tools today. I will briefly mention some of them. For instance, of course, when we want to create code, we can use all the builders that are available. When we want to release, we can use the Salesforce CLI. We can use all the different commands that are available to move code from one node to another, etc. And to take a look at all of that from an upper perspective and to manage all the different stages through which the features need to go, we have something kind of new. It was made GA, I think it was September last year, called DevOps Center. And we are going to take a look at a demo for DevOps Center at the end of the presentation, and we're going to explore it to see everything that we can do with it. Okay? So how do you start when you want to implement DevOps in your company? So the first thing that you need to do is to define your application lifecycle. And a good way to do that is to start asking questions to yourself. So for instance, first question, how are we going to plan and track our work, right? If you're a solo developer, maybe you're able to have a notepad with all the features that you want to implement. But if you have a team of developers, then things start to get more difficult. And then it's recommended to find software, a tool that helps you with that. Sorry, can you hear me correctly?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. So many popular work tracking tools are Trello, Jira. There is now a Kanban board on GitHub that you can use that is very cool. I recommend you to take a look. And I can tell you that, for instance, in Salesforce, we have our own Salesforce app to manage the work items and the bugs that we're working on. So, sorry, my cats are fighting. So maybe you heard some screams, but they are my cats. Okay. Okay. So we use in Salesforce our own Salesforce application to manage the items that we are working on. And we're going to see that in DevOps Center, we have something called work items, which is not super complete. It's just like the entry point to start working on a feature, but that can be easily integrated with tools like these ones, okay? There's no default out-of-the-box integration right now, but I know that some partners have already implemented some integrations with these tools. And I also know that we have some of these integrations on the roadmap so that they become out of the box on the tool. So next question, where are we going to store the code, right? One of the most important principles of DevOps practices is source control, right? Source control demonstrates extremely important in software development projects because it provides collaboration and visibility capabilities. You can take a look at what other developers are doing. You can keep track of the history of the changes that happened on the org, right? Sorry, on the code and consequently on the org. You can take a look at a previous version and go back to a previous version, for instance, if you need to, right? And that gives you a lot of power and a lot of observability over your project or your app. Also, it helps with conflict detection because normally with source control, different developers work on different branches. And if there is a conflict among those branches, is really easy to take a look at them and see where the conflicts are and merge the files in a way that makes sense so that we don't lose any work, right? And if we lose the work, we can always take a look at the history and recover that work. So it's really useful for that. Also, from a quality point of view, it enables pull requests and code reviews, which means that to move the code that a developer is working on from the developer branch to another branch that corresponds to your integration or to your UAT org. Something that we can do is to create a pull request that another developer with more experience can review and to which that developer can add feedback. This is a really great learning tool, both for the reviewers and for the developers who created the pull requests. It's like the best tool for having conversations and for learning about development and improving as a developer, right? It is also key for automation because thanks to source control and to those automatic ways in which you can move your code between different branches is how you can implement, in many cases, continuous integration. And continuous integration means that in some of those steps, you're going to be executing some tasks automatically that are going to ensure that your code is working as expected. So for instance, we can automate tests that are executed every time that we commit, that we send some code to a pull request, sorry, to a branch. We can also execute code analysis tasks. We can execute, even run a code formatter that makes sure that the code is formatted in the same way, no matter the developer who's rewriting that code. And we can execute like a lot of automated tasks that ensure that your code is behaving as expected. There are several famous popular source repositories available. I'm sure that you're familiar with some of them, such as GitHub, Bitbucket, or GitLab. At the moment, almost all of them are Git-based. Git is like the protocol that they use to send the code from your local machine to the repo and from the repo to your local machine. And if you want to take a look at some examples of apps that are stored in GitHub, you can go to github.com/trailheadapps, which is the URL in which my team, the developer advocate team in Salesforce, have several sample apps stored in which we have set up like everything as we everything that we considered a best practice in regards to development, in regards to continuous integration, and in regards to every automation that you can automate in GitHub. So I recommend you to take a look at that. We will take a look at one of these repos later when we talk a little bit more about continuous integration. So in regards to source tracking, source tracking and how you store that code that initially may live in your Salesforce or into a source repository, a tool that's extremely important is the Salesforce CLI, because it's what we use to move changes between that or where you are developing or where you are creating your flows or where you are creating your landing pages and your local environment. And then you can use Git to move, store that code that you have downloaded and that you have locally into GitHub or into another Git repo of your choice. So my recommendation is to try to store as much metadata as possible in your repos, because that way you're going to make sure that if everything breaks, if everything is changed by another developer or another person in the org, you have a backup and you have that in your repo so that you can recover it or at least take a look at what happened. But I'm conscious that some of the metadata is simply difficult to retrieve and difficult to set up. And I know that some customers have decided to just store a portion of the metadata. It really depends on your use case, the level of maintenance that your or that your repo is going to need, right? And the knowledge that you have about like development and DevOps practices, and of course, the possibilities of downloading that metadata or not. But my recommendation is that you always try to store as much metadata as possible. There is something, so to check which metadata is supported or not by the Salesforce CLI, which is the first step that we need to do to retrieve that data from your org. There is a page called Metadata Coverage Report, which is here. I will share all the resources at the end of the presentation. And here, if you see that the metadata is covered by the metadata API, that means that you can use it with the Salesforce CLI and download that code, retrieve that code or that metadata to store it in your source code very easily. If there is a metadata type that you would like to store and it's not available, there are other options. You can use Apex, for instance. You can use another scripting language to try to get that metadata through another API. And there are also some third-party libraries that some of our partners have already created. So like, something that I always recommend is to Google a little bit and try to find solutions before reinventing the wheel, because there are like many smart developers out there and there are like many solutions available that you can take a look at. So what happens is if my org is huge, something that you could do is to try to divide the code in units that are meaningful by themselves. If you're able to divide your org in smaller packages and maybe store those even in different repos, right? Then it's going to be also easier to manage everything in regards to how you store your metadata, how you move your metadata between environments, promoting it, etc. So that's a strategy that you could follow, and we are going to talk about that a little bit more later when I talk about the package development model. So something that you will also need to do is to select a Git branching strategy. There are several ways in which you can configure your GitHub repo, your Git repo. And there are some ways that are more suitable to Salesforce. I particularly like this one, which is the one that DevOps Center uses, which is that you have one branch by org. Like, for instance, if you have a UAT environment, you have a UAT branch. If you have a staging environment, that means that you will have a staging branch. And every time that a developer works on a feature, he or she creates their own branch. And then what we do is to move those features up in the pipeline, okay? Or right in the pipeline, depending on how you draw it. So that's something that you will need to define. And of course, we will need to define which is going to be our pipeline strategy, right? Very typical one is the one that I explained if we think about the Git branching strategy that I just talked about, but translated to orgs, right? You may have like your production org where everything starts. You may have your staging or right before production for final tests, final touches, right? You may have your UAT or for user acceptance testing. And maybe you have also integration, which is where all the different features that different developers are working on are merged to make sure that they don't break anything between each other, right? And this is just a recommendation that you can have, or it's one example of pipeline, but you can have the pipeline that works better for you. And of course, you need to define the type of sandboxes and orgs that you want to use for each different stage. That's something important. So as we're talking about development, and I am a developer, an important decision to make is in which environments we're going to develop, right? There are like two kind of environments in which you can develop. One is developer sandboxes, and the other one are scratch orgs. And this is a question that many people ask me. And I find difficult sometimes to convince people to use scratch orgs. And scratch orgs is something that I love. I think that they have a lot of benefits. I'm also conscious of the constraints that some projects, some customers have, especially if they have like old big orgs with like many integrations and a lot of code and a lot of customizations, right? But even though I recommend you to give them a try, because they are designed for applying all these DevOps practices and cultural philosophy that we have been talking about. They are designed having source control in mind. So they have been designed to force source control so that your org is not the source of truth anymore, but your repo. And I recommend you to take a look at them. So what's the main difference? What are the main differences? So if we think about, say, sandboxes, they already contain the metadata that your production org has, and this is a great advantage, right? And more now taking into account that we have the quick create functionality, and they are created like much faster, right? In some sandboxes, especially if you work with developers sandboxes, you will have to load your data, but that is something that you can automate. There are also some packages, some tools created by third-party developers, by partners that are free to use out there, open source, and that you can also take a look at. Something about sandboxes is that they don't expire, right? But at the same time, when something is broken in your sandbox and you need like to refresh it, it's a bit harder because you cannot refresh them instantly. It depends on the time of the type of the sandbox, but it's going to take you some time to refresh them, while with sandboxes, creating a new sandbox, with scratchers, creating a new scratcher is instant. Something cool about sandboxes that was not working before is that now source stroking can be activated, and that is a game changer as well for developers, because you can use sandboxes and not having to keep track yourself of the metadata that you are changing in the org and the metadata that you are changing locally. Source tracking, which means detection of changes in an automatic way, now can be activated in sandboxes, and it's something that you can use. So on the opposite side, scratchers start empty, but there are two cool features that you can try out to start with a more configured scratcher. So one of the features is called scratch or shape, which lets you copy some parameters from another scratcher to a new scratcher that you create. So for instance, you can copy like the licenses or the features that are activated in the scratcher, and in general, the shape of the scratcher. And the second feature is in beta at the moment. It's called Scratcher Snapshots. And this one allows you to take a look at another scratcher and copy all the metadata from it. When this is available, it's going to be like much easier to set up scratchers, but at the moment it's beta. And I don't know exactly the roadmap for this product, but Scratcher Shape is GA, okay? And with Scratcher Shape, sorry, I said that you copy the shape of a scratcher, but it's not exactly like that. You define the shape of a scratcher in your scratcher configuration file, and that is how you set up all the licenses and features and limits and so on. So scratchers expire. They have a maximum duration of 30 days, and they have out-of-the-box source tracking, which is what I was explaining here, that now in some boxes can be used as well. And as I told you at the beginning, for me, one of the main benefits of scratchers is that they force source control. So they force you to have your code in a repo that you can reproduce, that you can deploy instantly, you can populate with data instantly, so that in seconds or in minutes at most, you have an exact copy of the product or feature you are developing, and so that you can like go back to previous versions if you want, because you can simply pick an older version of the code that you have in your source control system and deploy that code, or you can really simply like merge different features that may come from different branches, different developers, and deploy that yourself. So it's like the full control for the developer, right? And here I have also a summary of the different the number of sandboxes and scratchers that you can create depending on the edition, which could be also a decision or a criteria to take into account before taking the decision. If you decide to go for sandboxes, the most important recommendation that I would make is that you try to use only one sandbox per developer. So you have one dedicated sandbox per developer, because if there are several developers working on the same sandbox, I'm sure that you've experienced that sometimes, it's a real mess. So recommendation, most important, just have one developer environment per developer. If, in which cases should I use sandboxes, or it's more recommended to use sandboxes? Well, if your project is too old, too big, it's a silo project, and that is really difficult to divide, and that you don't plan maybe to expand too much, or where you where you are not going to have like several developers working at the same time, something like that, maybe that's like a good reason to keep using sandboxes, right? If you are an ISV, if you are creating new projects, or if you are able to modularize your projects and divide them in small pieces or small packages, then my recommendation is that you will try to scratchers. Okay, so Next question, and we are arriving to the end of the questions, okay? I'm not going to speak much, and we're going to go to the DevOps Center demo. So how we're going to move the changes between environments, right? So this is a typical pipeline, similar to the one that I showed before, right? In which we have our development org, which could be a sandbox or a scratch org. We could have our integration org, staging, production, etc. And traditionally this environment was a sandbox, and the way to migrate changes from one org to another was by using change sets, right? That's like really old times. And now we have like many more tools available that help us implement all these DevOps principles into our application, okay? So the idea now, it's kind of different. What we should do is to still develop in our sandboxes or scratch orgs, but our source of truth shouldn't be the org. Our source of truth should be the repo in which we are storing those features. So every time that a developer works in a feature, that developer should be pulling or retrieving those changes and pushing them to the repo so that they can live in the repo and we can keep track of them. When those, sorry, let me change this. Yeah, I can put it there. When those changes are reviewed by another developer, when our automated tests have passed, our code analysis task has passed as well, and we're sure that our code is correct, we can merge it to the branch that represents the next stage, which is the integration stage. And then we can deploy that change to that integration org, so that we make sure that in that org we are that feature that we just deployed doesn't collide with other features that other developers have been working on. And we can repeat the same operation over and over through the different environments that appear in our pipeline. And this is like the foundation of DevOps Center, and this is how DevOps Centers works. But with DevOps Center, if you are a user who doesn't want to like deal with all these commands and like doing all yourself, right? You can use like some UIs that are available in DevOps Center that are going to let you move these changes and keep track of everything much easily. You are going to have a lot of visibility of what's happening when the developers are working and when we are moving those changes between environments, okay? Here, something to highlight about this slide is that there is an option to deploy the code, like using the SFDX deploy command, or here they say something like SFDX package install. We give you the two options. This is what we call, you have seen in Trailhead maybe a Trailhead module called or development model. I think we're going to change that name, okay, because it doesn't work. This or development model just means that you are moving the code yourself with SFDX, and you are not dividing the code, like you are moving the whole code and you are not dividing the code in unlocked packages. And package development model means that you divide your code in unlocked packages and you install those packages and the different orgs that are part of your pipeline. It's a way of distributing changes in which everything is modularized, and it's like much easier to perform certain tasks if you are able to divide your code that way. So what are the benefits of package development? Well, it's what I told you. What you do is to divide the metadata in packages that can be deployed independently. And in general, if your package is smaller, you have less code, everything is going to be easier. So it's going to be easier to develop the features that you have there. It's easier to maintain, also to test, and also all the release process. There are some added benefits, which are, first of all, you have the ability to evolve different package versions independently. So for instance, you may have a package that makes it to version 1.0, and a second package that makes it to version 1.0 in the first release. But then in the second release, maybe there are some more features added to this package, and you go to a different versions because there are like more developers working on this package goes at a higher speed, and we're able to evolve those packages independently. And thanks to package development, we are able to do that and install those two packages in our production, or like much easily that if we had to do everything with a big source code repository, right? There is, and also secondly, it gives also more visibility into what you are developing and deploying in your production. Or there is a trailhead module that helps you determine if your app is ready for package development, and they give you some tools and some tips that you can use to decide if you wanna take this approach. So I also recommend you to take a look. And there is something called OR-dependent unlocked packages that allows you to create unlocked packages that depend on some unpackaged metadata that you may have in your production. Or sometimes you don't need to like divide every single metadata that you have in your OR, but you can like create packages that depend on some metadata that is already there and that doesn't belong to any package. So I also recommend you to take a look at that. Another question that you will need to ask yourself is if you want to preserve data privacy while testing in sandboxes. Sometimes this is just required because of countries' legislations, and there is something that you can do with data mask. If you don't know this product, what it does is once your sandbox copies the real data that you have in your production or in your customer org, then it obfuscates some of the private data, for instance, the emails or the names of the persons, and it does it in a way that makes sense. So it's not really a random pattern. The email is going to be an email that makes sense, okay? And last consideration that we need to bear in mind is if we are going to implement that automation, right? I already told you that having a source control repository enables automation because you can execute automated actions every time that a branch is created, a commit is pushed to a branch, for instance, every time that a branch is merged into another branch, etc., etc., etc. And typically, those actions are going to be execute a code analysis tool, execute your tests to make sure that all of them are passing, calculate code coverage. We have a CI job, for instance, in our sample apps on Trailhead apps, in which we always calculate the code coverage so that we make sure that we are complying with the 75% one. And well, many different automated tasks that you can perform. And for this, there are also many free platforms available. You can take a look at. For instance, in Trailhead apps, we are using GitHub Actions, but there are many popular ones such as Jenkins, Circle CI, Travis CI, etc. And there are also many Salesforce partners who provide like automation capabilities. Today, I've tried to avoid mentioning Salesforce partners because I want to be fair and not like mention some of them and forget about others. So I've tried to use just tools that are available for everyone and that are not part from the Salesforce ecosystem. So let me show you some of the CI jobs that we have implemented here in Trailhead Apps, for instance, here in Dreamhouse. And if you go into this GitHub folder, you can see that we have implemented some workflows. So this is a workflow that is going to be executed every time that we commit something to a branch. This one is going to be executed every time that we merge a pull requests, and we have like different ones. For instance, this one executes when we create a package for this app. And if we go into one of the workflows, we can see that here we are formatting our code, we are linting our code, we are executing the Lightning component test, we are then pushing the OR to a scratcher to make sure that it deploys correctly, then we are adding some test data so that we can execute some Apex tests. So I think this is not really needed, the sample data, because the Apex tests don't see the sample data, but anyway. And well, also triggering some packaging workflow so that every time that we push something to, or we merge a pull request into our main branch, a new package is created automatically. And that's replaced on the README of the project. So it's super useful. Think about how much time we save by having all this automated, right? And it's very simple. You can go there and just copy the code, change a few things, and it will work. If you want to do that, I recommend you to watch a video that we have in the Salesforce Developers YouTube channel, in which my colleague Philippe Osil explained in a very detailed way how to implement this. Okay, so DevOps Center. DevOps Center is the product that we have released to help you manage all this directly from Salesforce, also to replace change sets. So there was an idea on the idea exchange that had 75,000 points, which was, please, we want a replacement for change sets that works better. And DevOps Centers is the replacement, of course, but it is much more, okay? So with DevOps Center, we are able to track changes. So we are able to have different environments connected and develop on an environment, and DevOps Center is able to detect the changes that we have performed in that environment and like pull or retrieve those changes for you, right? Behind the scenes, it's integrated with GitHub. At the moment, we only support GitHub, but we are working on supporting other source control providers. And I'm going to share the roadmap later at the end of the presentation, where you can take a look at all the status of the different integrations or projects that we're working on. And it also helps you, this is the part that replaces changes, to move changes across environments with just clicks, okay? Very easily. And we have thought about it in a way in which, if you want to follow your regular process that you are used to follow as a developer, you can interact with someone else who's working with DevOps Center. DevOps Center is able to read the changes that happen in that GitHub repo that are performed by developers who don't want to use DevOps Center. And the collaboration between an admin or a release manager and a developer is completely seamless. So these are basically the principles of DevOps Center. Again, they map one-to-one with the principles of DevOps practices in general, source control, how you develop and test changes outside of production in sandboxes, change management, release management, collaboration among different teams, and automation. Okay, so let's take a look at a demo. Let me go to my org here. And I'm going to show you an org in which I've deployed a drink house. So this is supposed to be my production org. Drink house is one of our sample apps, if you don't know it. And we're going to make some changes as if this was our app that we're working on as ISVs or as if this was our Salesforce implementation, okay? So to open DevOps Center, you go here to the app manager, and it's an app. At the moment, DevOps Center is a managed package that you install. You need to go to the setup UI. I can show you that. And from the setup UI, there are some options that directly take you to install that package, okay? But I already did that in my org, and I already have it configured. It is very simple. Then you need to assign a permission set and create a connected app. Everything is in the documentation, but it's not hard to set it up. So once you have created that, you have that app available that pops up DevOps Center. And in DevOps Center, you can have different projects, and I created one called Greenhouse. So the first thing that you will need to do in DevOps Center is to define your pipeline. Let's take a look at mine. Okay. So the pipeline that I decided to create, here I have the environments, and we're going to see it easily. I have a production environment, which is this same org. I decided to do it in the same, to install DevOps Center in the same production org that I'm using. Okay, that's perfectly reasonable. Then I have a staging org, which is a sandbox. Then I have an integration org, which is another sandbox. And then I'm using two sandbox for development, but this could be also scratchers. I created sandboxes for convenience. And here is where you define your pipeline. And once you have defined your pipeline, I connected the different stages with the different orgs, then you can activate this pipeline and start using it. So what does it mean having a pipeline? That every time that we create a work item and that we work on a developer feature, that developer feature needs to go through all the different stages till it arrives to production, okay? So once you created a pipeline and activated it, you can start creating work items. I created these two, but I'm going to create a new one. So for instance, what we are going to do is we're going to make some changes on this page, and we are going to move things around. So we're going to create a new item, and we're going to call it like move components on property finder page to fit UX design. For instance, let's imagine that I have a UX designer here with me. So here you can like define what people need to do and assign it to people, to someone on the org, to a user in the org. So as I told you at the beginning, this work item tracking tool is very simple because it just has like the subject and the description and the person who needs to work on that. But you can integrate this with Jira and with other tools easily. Not out of the box, but you can create an integration because these are actual custom objects on which you can create triggers and through which you can create automations, okay? So let's say that the release manager created this work item, or maybe the Scrum Master or the product manager, and I'm now the developer and I want to start working on this work item. So here I have two options. Now I can decide to work through the DevOps Center workflow, which is going to be more point and click, right? Or I can like simply ignore everything that goes through the DevOps Center and work with GitHub myself, like committing changes to the branch, to the branch that's going to be created behind the scenes, because for every project there is a GitHub repo behind the scenes, and to work on that like completely in a completely separate way. If I pick this second option, DevOps Center is going to use the GitHub events API to take a look at what I'm doing on those branches that are going to be created behind the scenes and synchronize what the developer is doing on the background with what the release manager is able to see here. At the moment, I've been told that there is a problem with the GitHub Events API and that there is a bit of delay, and they are working, like the DevOps Center team are working on a solution for that, okay? So the other option is to go through DevOps Center, and this is the one that we're going to see today because I think it's the most impactful one, and for the other one, we would need to wait for that delay. So here I say I want to develop and commit my changes to the work item feature branch from DevOps Center using a connected development environment. Fantastic. This is what I want to do. So here I can pick one of the development environments that I registered in my pipeline. For instance, I'm going to pick the development environment 1, and I'm going to proceed. So you saw that. It told me that a branch has been created, right? Okay, here I have the name of the branch that has been created. If I'm interested in taking a look at the code, I can navigate to the branch directly from there. This branch is a copy from the branch that I have in my production environment. Okay, the branch that I have deployed in my production environment is the one that we take as a reference, or that DevOps Center takes as a reference to create this branch. So at the moment, what has happened is that DevOps Center has created this branch and has also gives me an option to open the development environment in which we want to work. So I'm going to open that development environment. We can see here that in the URL. Sorry? Sorry, say that again. Did you have any question or?
I think somebody was just, must not have been on mute.
Okay, sorry for that. Fantastic. So this is my development environment, and we can see that in the URL that it says dev1. And here, well, really, I don't have properties because I didn't load the sample data this time, but we're going to do some change. So I'm going to edit the page, and I'm going to move some components around. So for instance, we're going to put this component here and this component here. And I'm going to save the page. So this is a small change, but normally you will make like more interesting changes, right? Than the one that I did. So what is interesting here is that if now I will go back to my work item and I click on pull changes, this DevOps Center is going to be able to detect that I changed something in my org, the property finder page, exactly, and I'm going to be able to commit those changes to the branch. So basically, DevOps Center is using source tracking, because source tracking needs to be activated in the org where you are developing, to see what has changed and lets me from here commit directly to that GitHub branch. So it's saving me from having to do all that manually. If I want to do it manually, I can, because I can follow the other workflow. But if I don't want to do it manually, this is a big help. Okay, so now we're going to say that we move the components around as expected, for instance, and we're going to commit the changes. Okay, now it says here that commit is being initiated. It's cloning the repo, retrieving the metadata, creating the commit, and that's it. It tells me that the commit has been completed. So the next step, if we take a look at the branch again, here I should have, let me see, a new commit that was added by this one. Was added by DevOps Center on my behalf, because when I configured DevOps Center, I connected it to this GitHub repo, okay? And that's great, but what would normally happen after that is that we go to the code review phase, okay? How can we do code reviews? Of course, we could create, again, a pull request manually, but from here, we can click on this button, create review. Okay, that creates, here they have called it change request, but the change request is exactly a pull request, okay? And there is a button that can take you directly to that change request, in which we can see the files that were changed, which is my Flexi page. And we can see that also this change request, what it's trying to do is to merge integration, the work item to the branch in which I've been working, to integration, which is our next stage. So let's say that here the developer, I cannot do this because I'm the author, but let's say that my manager or my colleague, my teammate approved this change request. And then once that is done from DevOps Center, we can say, okay, this is ready to promote. That means that the pull request has been approved and it's ready to be promoted. So that's what the developer or the builder will do. Then what can we do once all that has happened, right? Our work item is approved and it's really to be promoted along the different stages. So we can go here. This could be maybe the release manager, the person who does this. And we can select this item to promote it to the next stage on the pipeline. Here we have several options. We can define like the way in which we run the test. We can define which metadata we want to promote. So this is like the Delta deployment. Deploy only the changes that are not in the integration stage. And I'm going to pick that deployment because it's more efficient. And I'm going to pick the default test option. So here I'm going to click on promote. And what this is doing is to merge that pull request into the branch, the integration branch. And it's also deploying to my integration environment. So it's saving me a lot of time because it's doing all that for me. Okay, so now it's promoting. I've been told that if one of the operation fails, both fail. Okay, there is a synchronization with the operation, so it couldn't happen that you get stuck in the middle. And here we have our work item that was promoted. I'm going to promote it to the next stage so that you can see something else. Okay. Let me see. I think that is giving me a conflict because I was working with this one before. Let me try to promote this one first. No. or maybe, I know why it's giving me the conflict, maybe because I may have on the staging branch. So I started, what I did to set up this is that I copied all the code from Dreamhouse. And in that code, I had like all the continuous integration workflows set up. And I think I removed them from the integration branch, but I think that I didn't remove them from the staging branch. And that is why it's giving me some errors, because I have some validations that don't let me exactly. So here in the staging branch, I have some workflows that are not really working because they are prepared to work on the Trailhead apps repo and not in my repo. And because of that, it's not letting me pushing this code to the staging branch. Indeed, if we take a look at this, this is the pull request that DevOps Center has created to try to move those changes to the staging branch. And we have here some checks that hasn't passed, and that is why it's preventing me from checking. So sorry for that. I cannot show you that. But well, what I wanted to show you is that once you have promoted something here, you are able to see like the differences between this environment here and this environment here. There is a button that appears here that tells you which work items, or no, it's here. Let me see. It's on this screen, sorry. So here, for instance, yeah, sorry, I was in the wrong screen. So here, for instance, we see that in the integration stage, we have the default code that we have from the beginning, plus 2 work items. And when one of the development environments gets out of sync, I can take a look at why is out of sync. And here it's telling me, the DevOps Center is telling me that this development environment, which is the development environment 2, doesn't have the work item that I just promoted to the integration branch. And something that I can do is to click here on sync. And by clicking on sync, what I'm doing is to bring everything that I have in the integration environment back, so that my dev2 environment have the work item that I just deployed to integration. This is very useful when there are different developers working on different features, and this developer finishes, and then the other developer needs the work that the other developer finished. You can bring that from branches and stages that are upper in the pipeline using that synchronization feature. Okay, so that is what I wanted to show you for the demo. Last thing that I have here on the slides is that the DevOps Center roadmap is public. You can go to this URL. I'm going to share everything at the end, and you can see what we are working on, what has been already shipped. For instance, we're working on the Bitbucket integration, okay? And you can get into the details and see what, like, all the conversations that we are having there, what we are researching, considering, etc. And yeah, it's a great way. This is always updated, and it's a great way to have visibility of what the team is working on. And finally, if you want to take a look at the resources, I'm going to paste anyway the link that this QR code points to in the chat window. So what I'm doing lately is to create a quick document with all the resources, because I think it's the easiest way to share several resources with you. And I'm going to paste that in the chat so that you have it. And you're going to find like some blog posts, some documentation, let me see. Yeah, the DevOps Developer Center. We have a DevOps Developer Center on the developer site, in which you can find a lot of information, tools, threadhead modules, videos, etc. about DevOps, and you have some more interesting resources here. Okay, so with that, I talked a lot. Sorry for that. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. So does anybody have any questions? I know I have a couple. Yep. Go for it.
A question about the sync feature. So I'm developing in Dev, and I know I can sync backwards into Dev. One of the challenges that I've seen constantly is when we're at the stage of UAT and we're testing, that things are found to be broken and people are making changes in UAT. Rather than going back and making the changes at the beginning and moving them up. So does the sync allow you to see what's been changed in UAT?
Yeah, so the sync allows you to see what's been changed in the next environment. So if there are changes in UAT, you should be able to see those in the previous stage. So if your previous stage is integration, in that integration stage, a sync button should appear. And in that sync button, you should be able to see which work items have been implemented into UIT. But what you are saying is, I think, kind of different, because what you are saying is that someone goes straight into UIT and performs changes outside of DevOps Center and outside of the GitHub repo. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, so there is like a bad practice that shouldn't happen, right? Because, yeah, because the change should be, we think about it. So DevOps Center gives you a lot of agility in regards to how you move things between environments. So if you need to make a change, it shouldn't be that difficult to start a new work item, develop that feature in the development environment, and then move it to the UAT environment quickly, if that is your need, right?
Yeah. But it always happens.
Yeah.
Am I the only one that's on project where it happens? Like, who changed it?
Yeah. Anyway, what I'm going to do is, as this meeting is being recorded, I'm going to take note of all your questions, because maybe the product manager for the DevOps Center product has like some more information about this that I am missing, because I haven't worked with DevOps Center in a real production environment. I have done a lot of demos, but I know that they have. So this is my response, but I will take note of all the questions and I will expand more if the product manager gives me more details later. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, one of the questions actually was along that same line. Basically, what you're talking about is what I refer to as rogue changes. And so people are making changes, not following the process. So anyway.
Yeah. At the moment, you should be, so you can like commit your changes to different GitHub branches without tracking them, without doing all the promotion and tracking in DevOps Center, but you need to still have a work item and you need to still have a GitHub branch, so that DevOps Center is able to detect those changes. And DevOps Center is able to detect that well, source tracking is implemented. So DevOps Center is using source tracking. So it's going to be able to detect that there are some changes, but it's not going to know where those changes came from. And that there is where we have the problem. But anyway, I will expand more on this topic for sure. And there is a question on the chat that Marlene asked that says, does Salesforce use Agile Accelerator or something else? So I'm not sure what Agile Accelerator is. It seems to me like a program for Scrum teams or for Agile development. Marlene, were you referring to something like that, or am I wrong?
That's what I was asking about. You just mentioned that you use something to track work items, and I wonder what that internal tool was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's just our own implementation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions, and I was too lazy to put them in the chat, but I'll piece them out. So is there anything existing or in the roadmap in Developer Center, or DevOps Center, I guess, that handles things beyond metadata, like data, right? We have developer orgs, whether they're Scratch or normal sandboxes, but we need some sampling data in there. We'd like to have it scripted out. There's third-party tools that help with that. Is there anything coming along those lines?
I don't think so, but that's something that you can implement in your CI jobs. So for instance, let me show you how we're doing that on our sample apps. Is this one here. So for instance, for this one, we have a script that allows you to import data. Really, we're using I think it's called data tree or tree data API. I'm not sure if it's data tree or tree data. And we have some sample data that you can load by executing an SFDX command. So that's kind of an automation that you can execute every time that you create a sandbox or every time that you create a scratcher and you deploy your code. So I don't know about nothing in the roadmap, but there are definitely some things that you can do yourself and automate yourself.
Great. Second question. I understand the value proposition of this tool versus, the old school way of managing the metadata within your sandboxes and then using, the change set approach, right? For companies that are already using one of the third-party platforms out there to do this sort of thing, whether it's Capado or others, I'm just going to say Capado because we're using that. What's kind of the special sauce for the Salesforce implementation?
So DevOps Center is not trying to compete with Copado or with GRZ. Really, Copado and GRZ are really well established in the market. They have been there for many years, and DevOps Center has just started. But DevOps Center is meant to be a free tool for developers and for admins and for release managers that really need a solution on Salesforce so that we have something out of the box that help you comply with the best practices that DevOps, the DevOps philosophy recommends, right? Because with what we had previously, it was impossible to do that. And we really needed a better solution. That is why DevOps Center was built, and that is why it's completely free. There is no cost for using DevOps Center because it's something that developers really needed and that Salesforce professionals really need it, and it's not an attempt to compete with other tools, and that of course are more complete right now because have been in the market for many years, right?
Is there, so appreciating that the answer couldn't be much different than that probably, because of course they're also, you know, in the Salesforce ecosystem and partnering up and running on Salesforce and all those things. But is there anywhere where the tool, because it's part of Salesforce or can leverage Salesforce APIs internally directly or anything like that, where it works better? There, like when we went through the shopping for the tools we have today, right? Some of them did better pre-validation of a deploy, et cetera. Is there anything where this tool shines versus the other ones that might drive us to it, even if it's not trying to?
Yeah, I can't speak to that because I don't really know like the internal details of the implementation, but I can ask. For sure, there must be like some benefits because, you know, when you remove layers and when you are the owner of the product and you can implement that on platform, is that you have less constraints, and normally that's translated into performance and into other benefits that, of course, I'm sure that it can have, but I don't know the details. So this is a question that I will save for later and that I will respond. So I can add all the questions to the quick document that I shared with the resources. And in some days, you will have my comments there, okay? But what I foresee, to expand on the question, is like third-party DevOps providers, like Salesforce DevOps provider, integrating with DevOps Center and making use of DevOps Center for certain tasks and for certain automations that now they are manually implementing or manually doing, right? Because I'm sure that they can leverage what DevOps Center does for some of their processes and some of their tools.
Go for it.
Alba, does the DevOps Center support approvals? So for example, anyone can commit to integration, but if they want to move from integration to UAT, for example, they can create the request, but they can't actually commit the changes.
So I actually, so what you are saying is if we can block promotions if the pull request is not approved, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. What happened in my org is that I don't have any rule that tells me that the branch cannot be merged if it's not approved. But if you activate that in GitHub, the merge is blocked and DevOps Center detects that. So I don't have any branch protection rule in my greenhouse GitHub version that I made. But if you activate some rules that protect your branch, for instance, you protect your branch from being merged or being included more code from another branch, if it's not approved, then DevOps Center is going to detect that. And that's why CI works with DevOps Center, because those GitHub actions that you can implement in GitHub can block the promotion of the pull request. Same as happened to me with the example when I tried to move the changes to staging.
And will I see that in DevOps Center, that the reason why my promotion was blocked?
Not now. Now the screen that you will see is the one that I showed, saying like there is a problem with the promotion, and then you can go to the promotion and see there what the problem is.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So I have a question on so the merging and the collision process. If you have changes in the target org that some of the changes need to be physically kept and some of them need to be not kept or whatever, how does a DevOps Center accommodate that?
Yeah, so when there is a conflict, it's going to tell you that there is a conflict, and it's going to give you an option to go to the pull request so that you can take a look at the conflict and select how you want to fix that conflict. In GitHub, you can fix the conflicts yourself, like saying, I want to keep these lines and I want to remove these other lines that I'm not interested in. So the idea is that you go to GitHub, you solve the conflict yourself, and then you try the promotion again. That is the way that it would work right now.
Okay. And then I did want to ask, on one of your slides, when you were talking about the sandboxes, best practice you were saying is every developer should have their own sandbox. And I just kind of, my 2 cents on that is I agree 1000%, but I just wanted to kind of throw in my definition of what I call a developer. It's not somebody who basically is cutting code in VS Code necessarily. That can be any admin or anybody who's physically making changes to the org in any shape or fashion. In this context, would be a developer. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Is anyone who's building in the org. It
Which could
doesn't
be an
matter if low code.
which could be an admin. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Anybody else?
Yeah, quick question.
Hey, Chris.
Sorry, I walked in late. Does DevOps Center work with Salesforce DX?
Yes, of course. So DevOps Center is using Salesforce DX behind the scenes to bring the changes and deploy the changes. And then if you want to work with Salesforce DX independently, like outside of DevOps Center, as long as you use the same GitHub repo, the same branches, and you create your feature branches and you merge from there to the integration branches, et cetera, following the same like strategy that you would follow inside of DevOps Center, DevOps Center is going to be able to detect that. But this is the thing that I told you that at the moment is not working like completely properly because there is a big delay in the GitHub Events API, and the DevOps Center team is looking for an alternative solution because apparently there's been a conversation between GitHub and us, and GitHub told us that they cannot fix the API. So the DevOps Center team, they are working on something else. There is a group on the Trailblazer community, which is here on the resources, not this one, in which the product manager for this feature is posting updates constantly. And here you have the explanation of this issue that I told you with the GitHub Events API. Here you have explanation about the last patch that they released. So the best place to stay informed is the Trailblazer community and the Roadmap Explorer.
Okay, how can we access this presentation and the resources?
Sorry, say that again?
Yeah, he was asking where is this accessible or where's the link for
Yeah,
this?
this is the Trailblazer community. This is the Trailblazer community. I'm going to paste it also.
I think you put up a QR code, but missed that.
On the chat, yeah, there is a QR code, but I'm trying to share the, I also shared the quick document here, and I'm going to show you the QR code again, just in case.
Yeah.
If you want to take a picture. Yeah, there you have. And this is a quick document. I've seen in the comments that the access is not correct, but I can fix that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Well, it's getting late for Alba. Maybe have time for one more question, but does anybody have anything? Well, Alba, thank you very much for your presentation. A lot of information there. I do need to go back and rewatch some of that. But I really appreciate you taking the time, especially at 1:30 in the morning, your time. I'll send an email to Mark in the morning telling him to allow you to sleep in. So, but anyway, thank you very much. Very insightful. And I think we all need to give her a round of applause for this. I really appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.